All right. To start off with, a V-22 helicopter crashed the other day, and you have some things to say about it?
Yeah, I guess it was Friday it crashed in Australia. The US Marine Corps was doing some exercises with the Australian military. I'm not sure what branch. And there was a V 22 Osprey that was flying off of a Marine helicopter ship, and it was coming in for a landing and crashed. And they said 26 guys were on board, and they rescued 23. They've called off the search for the remaining 3. And there's an interesting thing that I read, which was that the vehicle was coming in for a landing on this helicopter ship. And the way these helicopter ships work is that they're kind of like small aircraft carriers. They're not like the huge Navy aircraft carriers. They have a short runway on them, but they mostly just fly helicopters off of them, and then things like Harriers that have very short takeoffs and vertical landings. So when you come in with a helicopter to land on this, you pull up on the left side and you face the same direction that the ship is traveling, and then a guy will wave you in. And so he'll give you these hand signals to tell you how to land, which way to go, and if your nose is high or something like that. And so you kind of come in at this 45-degree velocity vector relative to the ship, right? So you're both facing the same direction, but you're moving forward and to the right to come towards your landing spot.
Why do you do that?
That's just the way they have it. That's the way they figured out is the best way to handle traffic coming in.
Is it something to do with pilots being able to see out the side or something like that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't really know. I mean, I'm not a pilot, so.
Not a helicopter pilot.
Not a tilt rotor pilot.
Yet.
So when they're coming over, that's the arrangement of when they're coming into land. And this article I read said that they were coming in for a landing. Something happened. Part of the helicopter struck the deck, and then it went into the water. So I was thinking about this, and there's this effect in airplanes and helicopters called ground effect. And so when you're in ground effect, it means you're about one rotor span or less off the ground. And you get this kind of buffeting effect that allows you to hover with less power than you would normally need to hover out of ground effect. And so essentially you're getting kind of some buffeting from the air that you're blowing down that helps you hover. Well, if you imagine a V-22, it's got 2 rotors. There's one out on the end of each wing. And when you're coming in, kind of sliding forward and sliding rightward onto the deck of this aircraft carrier, your right rotor is going to come over the deck first, and your left rotor is still going to be out over the water.
Maybe we should talk about what a V-22 looks like, because not everyone's going to have a picture of this weird aircraft in their mind.
Yeah. So the V-22 is this helicopter with 2 rotors, one on each wing, out on the left and right side. And then it has a full straight wing, like an airplane does. And so it can take off like a helicopter, and then once it gets going forward at high enough speed, it rotates those rotors down to a forward position and uses them like propellers on a normal aircraft to fly fast like an airplane. And so you get the benefit of flying fast and high like an airplane, but also being able to hover and land on a dime like a helicopter. But the important thing for this story is that you have 2 rotors, but one's on the left side and one's on the right side of the wing. It's not like a CH-47 where you have 2 rotors, one's in front and one's in the rear.
Okay.
It's a left and right rotor, tandem rotor helicopter. Tandem just meaning you have 2 rotors. So when you're coming in doing this kind of maneuver where you're going forward and to the right to come into your landing spot on this ship, your right rotor will come over the deck first and go into ground effect. But your left rotor is still out over the water, not in ground effect.
So when you're like crabbing over the ship, you're doing it close enough that you're within ground effect?
Yes. So you end up suddenly with one rotor in ground effect. And the instantaneous effect of that is that you feel as if you've suddenly gained lift on your right rotor, which means that your vehicle rolls left.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure it's something that they're all aware of, that when you're coming in for this kind of landing, this effect happens. But you could have other conditions. You could have crosswinds and gusts and, just the normal airspeed that you're doing while the ship's moving forward and you're landing and all these other effects. And it's interesting to me to see in the coming weeks as they release some information about this crash, if that turns out to have been the cause, that the right rotor got over the deck, got into its own ground effect, and then they rolled left and something went wrong, question mark, question mark, question mark, and then they strike the deck and go into the water.
What part of the craft do you think struck the deck?
The bottom of the right rotor. Because when they're sitting on the ground with the nacelle rotated up, the nacelle is the engine and the gearbox and the rotor all together. It's the part that rotates at the end of the wing. When the nacelle is pointed up while the vehicle is just sitting on the ground, the bottom of the nacelle is only like 3 feet off the ground, something like that. It rides pretty low.
Okay.
So it's likely, and they would have had the nacelle pointed straight up. They would have been in the helicopter configuration for this landing. So I would suspect that that's the part that hit the deck.
Do you think it'll get blamed on pilot error or something else?
From all the crash investigation reports I've ever read for a great many types of aircraft, it's very rare to blame the pilot. Even in cases where you had a known effect that was likely to disorient the pilot, and they knew that that was the cause of the crash, they will still go to great lengths to not blame the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say this, I mean military crashes. I don't know if that's some kind of unwritten rule or what, but there was a crash about 8 years ago or so in Afghanistan. There were some special forces guys flying around in some small turboprop plane, and it was dark, and there's some kind of effect, and I'm not completely remembering it, but basically you go into a turn in the dark, and because of the force you feel sideways from the turn, and because you can't see the horizon, you think the horizon is somewhere else, and then you roll further into the turn until you're upside down. And it's a known phenomenon where a couple of different things compound with each other, cause the pilot to lose their orientation of which way is up, and then they go upside down, and they lose all lift, and they go into the ground. And so this plane crashed, and everybody on board was killed. And even in that case, they went to great length to not blame the pilot, even though it was a known effect that the pilots are aware of, and he succumbed to it.
Well, I mean, where I work, we have this culture of blameless post-mortem. So if some kind of event happens, we're sort of like, that was a bad event. What can we do to make it not happen again? And the answer is usually not, well, don't put Gary on it because that guy's an idiot or something like that. It's sort of like, how could we have set it up so that Gary couldn't have broken things? Mm-hmm. And the idea is not be more careful because everyone's trying to be as careful as they can. It's try and make a system that succeeds every time.
Right.
So if the pilot knew and the pilot still succumbed to the effect, then I think the argument would be the aircraft was not doing enough to allow even a knowledgeable pilot to succeed. So we should put more indicators or controls in place.
Yeah. Ultimately, probably the way we can protect pilots the best is just make all aircraft autonomous so they have to get different jobs.
Probably so. It's hard to imagine very many things that a pilot could do that an autonomous aircraft couldn't do.
Yeah. Ultimately, people like to make the argument that, well, when you fly commercial, the pilot puts it in cruise at altitude, he doesn't do anything, and more they have automated takeoffs and landings on commercial flights. And people want to argue that, well, if something goes wrong, that's what the pilot's there for. And I always think if something goes wrong, that's when I want a computer that has the entire emergency checklist programmed into it, executing perfectly instantaneously. That's when I don't want a human in the loop.
Yeah. The other thing that people always leave out is that pilots have intentionally crashed aircraft before.
Yeah.
So it's a real threat. I think more than 1,000 people have died to that, but definitely less than 10,000. But so it's on that order of magnitude. But that's also a threat. An autonomous system would not intentionally crash the aircraft.
Yeah. I'm just interested to see what comes out, because I suspect from the initial report that they were coming in for a landing and then part of the vehicle struck the deck. I suspect it's the asymmetric lift of having one rotor in ground effect.
What could be done to reduce the number of incidents of this occurring in the future with V-22s?
I guess you could go back to the assumption that the vehicles need to land from the side of the ship. It may be better to land them from the rear, and then when they're done landing, have them taxi forward to the forward most appropriate parking spot. Because I assume part of the decision to have them land from the side is you can have guys coming in and out regardless of what order they're parked in on the landing spots.
Oh, yeah.
If you could come up with some other rules for lining them up on the parking spots, so that you could always have spaces open at the rear if landings were necessary. You could do it that way, because then both rotors come over the deck at the same time.
I have very little knowledge of this, but if I had to guess, I would have guessed that they landed vertically, just coming straight down over the ship.
Well, they come in from the side, and they get over their spot, and then they come down vertically straight onto their spot. But the final descent is only like 20 feet or so.
Okay.
So another thing they could do is come over the ship out of ground effect, get completely over their landing spot, and then descend all the way through ground effect on both rotors at the same time. That
seems like it would be easy to do. Wouldn't you just say your coming in altitude is now 80 feet or something, and that would do it?
I think so. I would imagine there could be problems with visibility of just how big of a down angle the pilot can see from the cockpit through the lower windows.
They don't have any vertical down windows, do they?
No.
Camera?
There's a FLIR camera on the front, and they could point it downwards.
That might not work very well, though.
I don't know if they have color TV through the FLIR camera, too. If there's another camera in the ball with it, or if it's only FLIR.
That wouldn't be enough either. You want to be able to land at night when the deck and all the crafts on it are the same temperature.
I don't think they're ever the same temperature. They'll always be visible on a FLIR camera.
What if they've been sitting there for a day?
It's not going to look like a solid color background.
Okay. Maybe I don't know that much about FLIR cameras.
You can watch gun cam footage, and they'll just be flying in the desert, and you can make out individual bushes and rocks and things.
I don't feel like that's the best indicator, though, because that's with the sun shining on stuff. What's the desert look like at night when the sun hasn't been shining on anything for 8 hours?
I think you can still tell the difference, because they emit radiation at different rates, so they'll cool off at different rates.
Okay.
And then the FLIR cameras, I believe, will adjust their color spectrum to the overall differential from hottest to coldest in the field of view.
Yeah, but they have a limitation on, like, sub-degree accuracy.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining a ship that has no parked aircraft on it, and it's been in a rainstorm for several hours, and it's nighttime, and you want to land. And so everything is exactly the temperature of the rain, and then you wouldn't be able to make anything out. You might be able to tell the ship deck apart from the ocean, and that's it. From
my experience working with simulated FLIR cameras, you can still see things like the stripes painted on the deck of the ship.
Okay. I guess the simple fix would be put 4 flares around the landing site or something like that, and people would do it if they had to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, the main topic of today, you wanted to complain about gun laws.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was not so much complain, but offer a introductory explanation of how some of the laws work.
Okay. Do you want me to ask you questions, or do you want to just give a lecture?
I would love you to. I would love you to, because I think you know enough that you know where some of the really stupid stuff is, and you can ask some good questions. Things like key rings and shoelaces.
All right. How big is an arsenal?
It depends on what country the reporter who's using the word came from.
What if they come from the United States of America, home of all the guns in the world?
It can vary from probably 4 to, I'd say anything over 10 would definitely be considered by that reporter. Any given 95th percentile reporter in the country.
More guns than you have hands.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's ridiculous about that word, because you really can't shoot 2 guns at one time effectively.
Yeah, I remember testing that.
Yes, Blake and I tested this at a gun range once about 10 years ago. And our conclusion was that if you trained a lot, you could maybe get to the point where, say you're right-handed, you could aim the handgun in your right hand, shoot it fairly accurately, while at the same time just spraying fire with the gun in your left hand.
Yeah.
So you really wouldn't gain too much advantage. I guess you could get really lucky and the gun in your left hand could hit something valuable or just cause the suppression effect, and it's really hard to say.
You could alternate eyes if you line up. If you line up with your right hand with your right eye, and then you shoot, and then you line up your left hand with your left eye. Not at the same time. That never works. But you're sort of taking a little time between each shot. Then maybe you can hit a very large target. I remember shooting them, and I hit the target several times with the right gun, and I don't know where the bullets from the left gun went. I wasn't sure if they went up or down. I didn't even know. That was how bad it was.
I think you can be much more effective just shooting one handgun properly, accurately, very quickly, and having 2 hands to reload it with.
There was no question that it was better.
Yeah.
It was striking how bad it was, though.
Yeah.
Because you hold both guns, you hold them in front of you, and you think, I could do this. And then you shoot, and then the target has like 5 hits on it for 20 rounds. And then you're like, never mind. I can't do this. No one can do this. So an arsenal is 3 or more guns, probably. Why would anyone in their right mind, any gun owner, have thousands of rounds of ammunition? Why does anyone need that many?
Because they're going to the range today.
But don't you only need 5 or 10 rounds?
That'd be a pretty disappointing trip to the range.
How many rounds will you go through on a day at the range?
Oh man, just me and my wife, easily 300 or 400, and then typically we're shooting with 2 or 3 friends, and so maybe between the several of us, we'll shoot 1,000 rounds in the course of an hour and a half or so. It's not too hard, and especially since guns in the last, say, 30 years, the way people use guns has changed. And so it used to be that people would have a bolt-action hunting rifle that shoots very slow, and you have to operate the bolt between shots, and the fixed internal magazine of the rifle only held 3 or 4 rounds. And then they may have something like a shotgun that they use for bird hunting, which is, has a 3-round capacity. And then they might have a revolver that they keep in their house that has a 6 or 7 or 8-round capacity. But today, all the guns that are sold, the handguns that have replaced the revolvers, they're all 17 and 18, 19-round capacities.
Not in California.
Yeah, not in California.
In California, they're limited to 10 rounds because that's the right number.
That's exactly, 10 is safe, but 11 is very dangerous. But that's only in the magazine. It doesn't count the 11th one that's in the chamber of the gun. So 12 overall is very dangerous.
That's true also. Same applies to shotguns.
But nowadays, people have semi-automatic box magazine fed rifles with 30 and 40 and even 60 round capacities. And shotguns have kind of gone the same way, where they're semi-automatic and they're now 9 or 12 or 20 round capacity. And so people shoot guns nowadays. They own and collect and have guns that just have much greater capacities than they did 30 years ago. And so the nature of shooting has changed, where maybe 30 years ago you could go to a gun range and shoot 12 or 15 rounds and accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. But these days, every magazine you have for your guns holds more than that. unless you're in California.
I bet very few people have ever had a range day where they've only shot 15 rounds. That's like nothing.
For the limited case of somebody who hunts and is just making sure that their gun is sighted incorrectly, I could see it.
Okay.
Because you don't need to fire many rounds just to go and make sure that your gun is still hitting in the correct spot.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, you mentioned semi-automatic weapons. So what's the difference between a semi-automatic and an automatic?
A semi-automatic is a gun that fires one bullet for every time you pull the trigger. And you can keep holding the trigger down, but nothing else is going to happen until you release the trigger and then you pull it again.
So what about 3-round burst?
3-round burst would be an automatic, because you pull the trigger and it fires more than one round before you release it.
Okay.
In the case of 3-round burst, it fires 3. There are some weapons with 2-round burst, and I don't know that there are any with 4 or more as a burst mode. Kind of the point of a burst mode was that you could almost hit the same spot multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And so before the recoil of the first round caused too much change in the point of impact, you would have more rounds going down range to approximately the same spot. So I don't think, I mean, offhand, I can't think of anything that has a 4-round burst or greater than that. But 2 and 3 are common.
Why not just make your rounds heavier and more damaging and then just shoot one?
From a military standpoint, where the burst modes come from, there are issues with defeating hard body armor. So you defeat some types of body armor by breaking them, cracking them, which compromises them against further shots. So if you can place multiple shots in a very small area, the second and later shots will penetrate the body armor. I think that was the thinking for some of the bursts. That's kind of some of the thinking today. In the past, when you actually manage to connect with someone, which is rare, then you hit them 2 or 3 times instead of once.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I don't see a way around that, because I know there are ceramic plates, and so once they're broken, they would have reduced effectiveness, and I don't see a way to build a super round that breaks them and does the damage.
Right.
It would be heavy and stupid.
Not in a gun that is easily man-portable.
Yeah. So, can just any old citizen own an automatic gun?
Oh boy, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with what is a gun by the legal definition, because it's not straightforward. A lot of the ways that gun laws are written in the US, they're not intuitive. And maybe someone who's listening has studied tax law or has done their own taxes, or maybe has investments and their own business, and they also work for someone else on the side, and so they're in a complex tax situation. When you do your taxes, everything makes sense. If you have income from something, it's counted from that, and if it costs you money to make that income, that's subtracted from somewhere else, and it kind of all adds up, and it's logical at the end that everything gets counted, and everything gets counted one time.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to gun law, it doesn't work that way. It's not a subject that lends itself to that kind of classification. So in biology, you have this idea of taxonomical classification. And it means that there's exactly one spot where something fits within a hierarchy or within a form of classification. And it works great in evolution and biology, because everything on Earth evolved from one original life form. And so it belongs at exactly one spot within that web of evolution from that one life form. And so when you understand an organism exactly, you can place him at his exact correct spot where he belongs within that web. It's very easy. But a system that would resist taxonomical classification would be books, like a library. So you walk into a library and they have books that are French books, say they're written in French. But then they also have books about cooking, and then they also have a section of books about history. Let's say you walked in and you were looking for a book about historical French cooking. You would not know immediately where to go look in the library. You may hope that there's a section of historical French cookbooks, or there may be a section of historical French books, or historical cookbooks, or French cookbooks. And you also just have the regular sections of French and cooking and history. And so you essentially have 7 sections you may have to search through to find where to classify them. And really, no section is more correct than another.
You could even have a book written in French about how to take books and cook them in a stew if those books are also written in French about French cooking.
And how that was done historically.
I forgot, yes, the history part.
But okay, so the thrust of that explanation, though, is that an argument can always be made for why that book belongs in one particular spot in that library above any other. Mm-hmm. And this is how guns are. So guns do not have a taxonomical classification when you take one gun and you hold it in front of yourself and you describe its qualities, and then you try to classify what it is.
There was no first gun that all the guns descended from?
No, there's no small evolutionary change between every gun. So the reason that that's a real pain for gun law is that most gun law in the US revolves around trying to classify guns taxonomically. And so immediately the system fails because you have all these edge cases that ride the lines between things, and then you get really bad laws that end up putting them in weird spots of classification. And then you have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which interprets and writes regulation based on the gun laws at the federal level. And they have to try to do the best they can, but they're working in a non-taxonomical system trying to classify things. And it makes for a lot of pain at times.
Well, and then I guess also, like with most regulation, something that everyone is incentivized to do is figure out where the line is and then build stuff that's exactly on one side of it and right at the edge.
Right. And also ask for clarifications from the ATF in a very strategic way over a long period of time so that you can go back and say, gotcha, now we can do this.
Yeah.
So the first question, though, is what is a gun by statute? So it's any weapon that is designed to expel a projectile by action of an explosive. Okay. That's the basic definition. So it shoots a bullet out the front because of an explosion that took place behind it.
I have so many questions just from that.
I know, it's terrible. It's terrible.
What's a rocket?
Yeah. Yeah. So a rocket launcher.
No, just a rocket. I'm just holding a rocket in my bare hand, and then I push the big red go button on it, and the whole thing takes off. So nothing was expelled. Or am I the gun?
A rocket is a destructive device. We'll get that.
Nice dodge, ATF. I'll get you next time.
So it's any weapon that can project, that can expel a projectile by the action of an explosion. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or it's the frame or receiver of such a weapon. So if you think about a car has a frame, and then everything else is bolted onto that frame. But at the essence of what a car is, the frame is the car, right? It's got VIN numbers on it, and they stick with the frame. Now, the VIN number is repeated in other places too, but the VIN number belongs to that frame, and that is the car. Everything else is just stuff that's bolted onto it that makes it drivable. And the same thing happens with guns. Every design of a gun will have a frame or a receiver, and those words are fairly interchangeable. It will have a frame that all the rest of the parts are attached to some way or another. Mm-hmm. The trigger and, a slide and a magazine well and a barrel and all these other things. But the frame is the gun in the eyes of the laws in the United States. The frame is what gets a serial number, and the frame is the part that you go through the hassle of buying. All the rest of the parts are just bolt-on parts that you can buy without any trouble. You can just order them.
If someone has their really cool assassin briefcase like they depict in the movies, only one of those parts requires a bunch of legal hassle, and all the rest of the parts you can just buy online.
The answer is not yes 100% of the time, but for For the terms in which you're asking that question, yes. The law in the United States at the federal level considers just a frame to be a gun also. Even if it's missing all the rest of the parts that would make it actually fire, the frame is still a gun.
Okay.
It also considers a gun to be a suppressor. So, a suppressor, you put it on the end of the barrel and it traps some of the high pressure gas coming out behind the bullet and it muffles the noise. So in the US, a suppressor itself is considered to be a gun.
So any suppressed gun is two guns.
Yes, it is. It's a gun with a gun on the end. And then destructive devices, which encompasses things like explosives and grenades and guns that are over a certain unacceptable size, so they're extra dangerous and things like this. We'll get a little more into destructive devices later, but it's kind of a niche spot in the law, and it has some of its own stupid parts, though. This definition of a gun, which begins at something that expels a projectile, the bullet, under the force of an explosive, what does that not include? Paradoxically enough, it does not include black powder guns. So modern guns fire using smokeless powder, and up until the late 1800s, they used black powder. And black powder is corrosive and, it doesn't burn nearly as quickly. Smokeless powder is much better, but they still sell black powder guns for things like collectors and people who are just into old style of guns, things like that. But those aren't considered guns by the law in the US.
What about a black powder cannon?
That is not a gun. You can buy those on the internet and just have them delivered to your house, which you can't with a normal gun.
Okay, so I guess, because I know those show up at certain ceremonial occasions. I think they're not firing a round with it, but
yeah,
I always wondered about that.
Typically when they do demonstrations of like artillery, stuff like that for ceremonies and things, they're simply setting off an explosive charge in the gun. There's no projectile.
You mean a non-explosive charge?
Okay, so black powder guns are not considered guns.
Ooh, I have another question.
Okay, great.
Maybe this is because of the TSA, but the TSA treats starter pistols, which can't expel a projectile, as a gun. Are those a gun?
Yes, they're actually included in the previous definition I spoke of. I just skipped over it, but starter pistol is actually included.
Oh, okay.
So a starter gun is a gun used to, it just makes a noise to indicate like an event, right? Like start of a race or something like that. So it doesn't fire a projectile because you obviously don't want a bullet coming down in the stands, but you do want like a sudden sharp crack that all the competitors will hear so that they all start at the same time. But starter guns are considered to be guns in the US.
Okay.
Also not a gun is air guns, BB guns, pellet rifles, those kind of things, because they don't use an explosive, they just use compressed air.
Okay.
But if we take what is a gun and we start to break it down more, we get to the three main groups of guns, handguns, rifles, and shotguns. These are generally less fuss to own in the US. And in most states, you can buy them over the counter with a background check. They're very common and legally they're kind of in this easy section of the law. So the law describes a pistol as intended to be held in one hand and with a grip that's at an angle to the line of the barrel. You have the barrel pointing one direction, the grip should point another direction, and it should be designed to be fired by one hand.
So what happens if the grip just sticks straight out of it?
It becomes in any other weapon, which is another class we'll get to.
Of course.
Yeah. What happens if the grip sticks out at a 1 degree angle? So after handguns, you have rifles, which are designed to be fired from the shoulder and expel a bullet from a rifled barrel. But the big point is they're designed to be fired from the shoulder, so you hold the back of it up against your shoulder and you shoot it that way instead of holding it in one hand like a pistol.
Okay, so then what's the smart gun from Aliens? It's designed to be fired from the little rig that they have attached to their hips, which is a Steadicam rig.
What would that qualify as in the US? You know, those guns they actually used as props in that movie were MG-42 German machine guns. They were surplus from World War II, which would actually be considered rifles because they were designed to be fired from the shoulder, even though they had them on a Steadicam mount for the filming of the movie. I know that's not the answer you wanted, but...
Yeah, if you design a rifle that can only attach to the Steadicam mount, then what happens? Or, sorry, I said rifle. You design some type of weapon that can expel a projectile with an explosive that's designed to be attached to a Steadicam rig.
Boy, I don't know how they would handle that. Gotcha. You know, the thing is, you really can't become involved with guns as a hobby without getting into the legal parts. And so for many years, I've been studying this stuff and, you know, learning about gun laws and things. But damn, that's a good question. I don't know what they would do. You can write a letter to the ATF and ask them for clarification.
All right. To do for Craig. Find out what a smart gun is.
Okay, you know, we talked about pistols and rifles, and then you have shotguns, which, similar to a rifle, is designed to be fired from a shoulder, but it has a smooth barrel.
But they make rifled shotguns.
They do make rifled shotguns, and they're still considered shotguns, even though they have a rifled barrel. This is some of your taxonomical classification problems.
Okay.
You would think those would be rifles, but they're shotguns. Are
there smoothbore rifles?
No, those will always be shotguns.
I don't know who would make such a thing anyways, but whatever. It's possible.
A musket. But the musket will be a black powder weapon, and it will not even be considered a gun.
Yeah.
So it won't be able to fall into any of these subgroups.
Okay.
Okay, so after those three main kind of easy sections of gun classification under U.S. law, you get into this broader section that's very confusing, and it's called NFA items, and it stands for National Firearms Act, which was a gun law back in the 1930s. And what it did is it established these different groups of guns, and they're really weird today, the way some of these are classified, and this law is still in effect, but it makes more sense in its historical setting. Essentially, they were trying to ban guns by placing a very large tax on the transfer and purchase of guns. And so what they said is you would have to pay a $200 tax in order to buy or transfer or make any gun. And back in 1934, $200 was the equivalent of something like $3,500 today. You are basically going to price guns out of everybody's hands and ban them by taxing them to death. The law had a lot of things removed from it in order to get it passed. And so regular rifles and shotguns and handguns were not covered by this law, but things like short-barreled rifles are covered. So a short-barreled rifle is like a rifle. It's designed to be fired from the shoulder, but the barrel is less than an arbitrary 16 inches long. And they just pulled 16 inches out of the air. There's no engineering reason why 16 inches it becomes dangerous or it's no longer dangerous, but under 16 inches it is really dangerous. In fact, the opposite would be true.
You said, so this was passed in the 20s, right?
No, 1934.
Oh, 30s. Why do you think they cared about short-barreled rifles at that time?
Because there was hysteria over gangsters and prohibition, and they thought they could stop all that by just banning the sale and transfer of legal guns.
Okay.
If you want to get one of these NFA items, you can still get these. You just have to go through this obnoxious process where you fill out these forms, you pay your $200 tax to make it or transfer it, and then you have to wait a long time for the ATF to process the request. And the wait time varies by how many are in the queue. Currently, the wait time's about 12 months just to get them to look at your piece of paper, cash your $200 check, and give you the form back approving you to have this item. The approval process does not check anything more than a normal background check for a regular gun at a gun store checks. So if you can buy a handgun in a gun store anywhere in America, then you can pass the check to buy any NFA item. So it's just kind of this obnoxious relic of bureaucracy from the 1930s. And from time to time, there are efforts to try and do away with parts of it or reform it or get it to work at least up to maybe 1990s computer standards. And, you know, it's really bad the way they administer the system, but it covers these short-barreled rifles. It also covers short-barreled shotguns, which, again, it's just a shotgun designed to be fired from the shoulder, except the barrel is shorter than 18 inches. So it's 18 for shotguns, it's 16 for rifles. There's no good reason for that. It's entirely arbitrary. Another one of the NFA items that you have to go through this long permitting process to get are machine guns. So it's legal for people in the US to own machine guns. It's difficult and it's very expensive, but you can get them in the US if you would like to have one. Now, there's an additional law that came on later in the 80s that closed the registry. What that means is that all the legally transferable machine guns that were registered were frozen in 1986. And so none have been allowed to be added. No new machine guns for civilian ownership and transfer have been introduced since then. So there's this artificial constraint on supply in the US. And there's somewhere around, I think it's about 2 million machine guns that are legal for citizens to own in the US, but no more can be added to that pool after 1986. And the effect of that is that any machine gun that you want to buy is very expensive. So if you wanted a legal M16, they run about $25,000 to $35,000. The same with a legal fully automatic AK-47. The very cheapest ones you can buy, you know, junk like Tech 9s and Uzis and things like that, those will run you like $8,000 or $10,000. So there's an artificial constraint on the supply, and that causes the price to go artificially high.
There's a organization in Las Vegas that is like, shoot a machine gun, and that's their whole business model. Do you think that they own a bunch of machine guns that are under this category?
Okay, so you're talking about this place in Las Vegas called Battlefield Vegas, and you can go there and rent machine guns to shoot on their range. The way that they get their machine guns is they are licensed by the federal government to build and own machine guns as a business.
Oh, okay.
And so when I said that you can own machine guns in the US, but it's expensive, that's the other way to do it. Either you buy one that can be transferred to an individual and it'll cost you anywhere from $8,000 to $9,000 or more, or you simply set up a business that has some kind of legitimate need to make or own machine guns, and you get the proper licensing from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and then you can buy any machine gun, even new ones.
Okay.
The net result either way is you can only have them if you're wealthy. Another type of NFA items are suppressors, again. So if you want to buy a suppressor to make your firearm more quiet, you have to go through this NFA process, pay the $200 tax, wait a year for approval, and then you can have it.
Why would anyone want a suppressor if they're not some kind of criminal assassin?
Because they save your hearing. They're pretty nice. It varies depending on what gun you put it on, what kind of bullet you're firing. It can make it from fairly quiet to still damaging to your hearing, though bearable for a short period. So it's not like the movie where it just makes this kind of puffing air sound. If you have a rifle and you put a suppressor on it, you can probably fire a few rounds and not be too bothered, but you would go deaf eventually. It's still about as loud as a jackhammer. But it is not instantaneously ear-damagingly loud like it is without a suppressor. So it's kind of a complicated subject. You know, when you shoot a gun, there are 3 different noises. There's, if you're shooting a projectile to supersonic speeds, you have a sonic boom of the projectile. And whether or not you have a supersonic projectile, you have the high pressure gas that has propelled the projectile and it hits the air. That makes a large noise. And then you have the metal on metal sound of the gun doing its thing, you know, the gun cycling to load the next round. So you have 3 noises. And the only one that the suppressor addresses is that second one, the high pressure gas hitting the air. And so the way the suppressor works is it provides a contained volume for that gas to expand in some and release from in a controlled way so that it doesn't hit the air as hard or over such a short period of time. Then the next NFA classification is destructive devices. Now, that's going to be things like hand grenades. So in the US, you can own hand grenades.
How many?
As many as you would like to register with the ATF. Now, you will have state laws come into this because you're storing dangerous explosives, and different states have different requirements on whether or not you need to build a magazine to store the explosives in and things like that. But in the US, if you would like to, you can file the correct form with the ATF, pay your $200 tax, get your approval, and then you can build your own hand grenade. And I don't know what you really do with it then, except say, hey, look, I got a legal hand grenade.
Well, I think now the use case is really obvious.
What are you going to do with it?
Make YouTube videos.
I guess. One short video.
Well, yeah, but have you never watched a video of someone throwing a hand grenade on YouTube? I may have seen such a video.
I've seen it on TV, but it never seems that impressive.
That's true. They don't have a bunch of orange fire like when it's a Hollywood grenade.
Yeah. It won't, like, blow up vehicles with sympathetic detonations. So, also included in this destructive device category would be things like rocket launchers. You could build your own rocket launcher, you just have to register it with the ATF. It also includes guns that are larger than 50 caliber. So what that means is that the bullet they shoot is greater than a half-inch in diameter. They consider those to be destructive devices, and again, here, 50 caliber is just arbitrarily chosen. There's nothing from a science or engineering backing to say that this is a good spot to put a line in the sand where you should have to pay a tax to do this.
What if your bullet has little wings on it or something and it expands after being expelled?
They measure the caliber of the bullet from the lands and grooves of the rifling inside the barrel. So even if you did have, like, fins that unfold afterwards, that would not affect what the government considered the caliber of the bullet to be.
So you just make some really long bullet that has an umbrella that opens and it becomes enormous.
A depleted uranium umbrella.
I don't know if you've ever seen, but there are people who make special arrows or crossbow bolts, I can't remember which one, that have 4 razors on the front that unfold, and then they spin through the air, and people use them to kill turkeys. Yeah,
it's to decapitate the turkey.
Those are very strange.
It's otherwise pretty hard, I guess, to hit a turkey in the neck.
Well,
with an arrow.
Maybe the idea is even if you do hit them, they don't die instantly.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got guns over 50 caliber in this categorization, but not always. So sometimes you'll have a really nice big game hunting rifle, like a rifle you might take to Africa to hunt elephant with, and say the bullets it fires are 3/4 of an inch in diameter. The ATF will just kind of magically wave its hands and say, that's not for bad purposes or anything. You don't need to register that. It's okay.
Huh. How do you know that you don't need to register it, though? There must be some paperwork there.
There's a list. So a manufacturer who builds big game hunting rifles like that will get that design approved by the ATF.
Oh.
And then you can just buy it as if it were a regular rifle and not considered a destructive device.
Are there any 50 caliber rifles that fall under that?
Well, 50 caliber is not a destructive device to start with, so it's over 50 caliber.
That's true. I guess I was just thinking of how 50 cal is banned in California.
Yeah, I do have some bullet points about that, precisely.
Bullet points.
Oh! Okay, so the last category of NFA items is this other catch-all category called any other weapon, and it's the most confusing category you could imagine. Because when it was created, again, the law in its original form was meant to effectively ban all guns by taxing them out of anybody's ability to purchase. And then there were various revisions to the law while it was being negotiated through Congress in 1934. And when it finally passed, it didn't ban all guns. It only put this tax on some categories, but this catch-all category of any other weapon remained. And what this was designed to catch was maybe Blake's Steadicam gun, but it specifically catches things like cane guns and umbrella guns and belt buckle guns and other types of disguised weapons. And it can additionally encompass normal seeming guns that are being concealed at the time. And the ATF will argue that you can have a gun that falls under some specific category, but if you put it under a trench coat, it's suddenly an any other weapon and it has to be registered. So there's all those categories. And for most people, most regular people who say own one gun because they have a psychotic neighbor who goes off their meds or enjoys hunting and owns one or two guns, most of those people will never get into the NFA classification of guns. It's more of a thing that people who really take guns up as a hobby eventually get into that because they'll decide there's some gun they want, but it's an NFA item. So they have to go through the tax and the permitting and the long wait through the bureaucracy and everything to get it.
Okay, I have a question about your trench coat gun there.
Okay.
Can you just register the gun in the trench coat? And they'll say, yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, you can just register the gun, and then from then on, you can conceal it under your trench coat legally.
Can you change trench coats and it's okay? Or do you have to get a little tax stamp on your trench coat?
It is agnostic to which trench coat you're wearing.
Okay.
In the history of federal gun laws in the US, or just the history of gun law in general, because it kind of ebbs and flows at the federal and the state level, you have three major eras of gun law history. So the first was the Jim Crow era in the post-Civil War, and that was the first time you really had any significant efforts at gun control in the US, and they were all aimed at keeping freed slaves from owning guns. And so in a lot of states, that's where your original prohibitions against carrying guns concealed or carrying guns in public came from. They would prohibit it in the state, but then they would only enforce it against black people. And that was kind of the first round of gun control that we saw in the US. And so that would have been 1860s and 1870s era. You had this kind of second round that happened in the mid-20th century from about 1930s to the 1980s or 90s. And it's kind of ambiguous because you did have some back and forth in that later era of this. But it was generally, the laws were generally more restrictive. They did a lot of things for taking away various rights that people had before related to guns. And then you have this third major era, which is the late 20th century and into today, where it's not really universally becoming more or less restrictive, but it's diverging. And it's happening at the state levels. And so what you'll have is that some states, just depending on their political makeup, will continue to make gun laws more and more and more severe. And then other states, depending on their political makeup, will just continue to loosen the gun laws more and more and more. And so they're really diverging state by state now.
Well, from what I've read, politics in the US are also diverging. Like Republicans and Democrats are getting ever more separated.
Yeah.
I could see it being a result of that. If a state is controlled by one or the other party, because they align pretty closely with gun control laws, then a Democratic state would want to show their democraticness by restricting guns more, and vice versa for Republican states.
Yeah. And that's what you see when you look at the breakdown of, what states is it easy to get a concealed carry license in, what states have things like magazine capacity limitations, what states have things like a state level assault weapon ban, things like that. It falls exactly on those lines. The states where you do have those prohibitions will be your very tightly controlled Democratic states like California and New Jersey and New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts and places like that, Illinois. You have basically four major gun laws at the federal level. You had this first 1934 National Firearms Act, which is what created all those classifications we talked about previously. In 1968, you had something called the Gun Control Act that was passed. And this was, if you imagine 1968, so John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in 63? Was it November of 63, I believe?
I wasn't born yet.
I
don't remember.
Oh, yeah. Okay. His brother Robert Kennedy was assassinated a few years later, I believe in 1967. He was campaigning for the primaries for the 1968 election, I believe. And then Martin Luther King had been assassinated a few years prior to that. And so you had 3 very high-profile assassinations in the U.S. You had the beginnings of kind of the underground movement and lots of wide-scale bombings and things like that. And the 1968 Gun Control Act was a response to that. And so it greatly restricted a number of things that had been previously legal. It defined this system of prohibited persons, which are people who are not allowed to have guns. It put that into place and defined who these prohibited people are. It did away with mail ordering guns to your house. It's done. And it really has nothing to do with lethality of the gun at all.
The prohibited persons thing is interesting. I suppose that's survived Supreme Court tests. The reason I ask is because the Second Amendment, in theory, guarantees just people in general the right to bear arms. And so if you prohibit a specific person from it, I would expect an immediate Supreme Court test where they say, this violates the Second Amendment because I'm a part of people.
Yeah, the idea of prohibited persons has passed the courts many times.
Okay.
You also had in the 1968 Gun Control Act, you had a parts compliance test, and what that meant is that if you had a rifle, then or a shotgun, it had to have a certain number of parts in it, no more than a certain number of foreign-made parts in it.
Okay.
And that's kind of a perplexing thing, because it's like, well, you know, some criminal going to count the number of foreign-made parts in his gun before he uses it for a crime? But it was something that they decided to do in order to further restrict importation of guns.
I guess the idea was to stop 100% guns.
Yes. And there's a lot of nuance to the parts compliance issue. I've never been really much into foreign guns, so I've never studied it really in detail. They also set up bans on what they called Saturday night specials. Really what a Saturday night special is a cheap handgun that a poor person can afford. And so it was a law aimed at keeping guns out of poor people's hands. They also set up a system of federal firearms licenses. So if you wanted to be in the business of selling guns, you had to be licensed by the ATF. And what came along with that in 1968 was a ban on buying guns from an FFL in another state other than the state of your residence. And so something that had been happening at the time was you had this whole civil rights movement, you had you had desegregation, and there was a lot of racial strife, and black people in the South would want to buy a gun to protect themselves with, and they couldn't find a gun store in their city in the South that would sell them a gun. And so they would drive north a state or two, and they would buy a gun. And so this law was meant to stop them from being able to purchase guns. It had obviously a whole lot of other parts to it. Those are kind of the major parts.
Before this, could just anyone sell guns?
You could be in the business. Now, I think the FFL system existed, but you could sell across state lines.
Oh, okay.
So anyone from any state could come to you. If you were an FFL in California, you could have sold guns to anyone in any state, but not after 1968.
Okay.
They didn't want people crossing state lines to buy guns. So 1986 comes around, you have Ronald Reagan in the White House, and the National Rifle Association in the 70s went from being strictly like a gun training and safety organization, and it created a political arm in the 70s. And so by the mid 80s, it was very powerful. And so they passed something called the Firearms Owners Protection Act, 1986. And it was generally helpful to gun owners. I mean, in balance, it was helpful. It fixed a lot of administrative problems in the ATF. So the ATF would do all of these malicious things. They were taking federal firearms license holders, people who are in the business of selling guns legally, and the ATF would prosecute them for minor technical violations, like not filling out a form correctly. They would criminally prosecute them for that, even though there was no criminal outcome to having not filled out the form correctly, and there was no intent to violate any law. And so part of what the 1986 Firearms Owner Protection Act did was fix a lot of those things where the ATF could no longer so maliciously prosecute people who were trying to be in the business of legally selling guns. Another thing it stopped was that the ATF would come in to audit that person's business by checking their books and all their records of who they had sold to, what guns they had gotten from distributors, and making sure the inventory matched up, guns coming in, guns going out, and then what's in inventory now, make sure everything's accounted for. That's an audit. And if the ATF decided they didn't particularly like a certain dealer for maybe a good reason or probably not, they would simply sit in their business and audit them nonstop. And so they would bring a bunch of ATF agents in and sit there with the books and the papers and all the forms spread out and basically occupy the business, and no customers would come in. And after several weeks, the business owner would go broke and have to shut down. This was a tactic that the ATF employed a lot with dealers it just didn't like for some reason. And so in 1986, you passed the FOPA, and that was one of the things that it took away their ability to do. Now, today, the ATF can only audit a dealer once per calendar year.
How do they ensure the audits terminate?
I don't know. I don't actually know the answer to that. I know it's no longer an issue, though. So the ATF no longer camps out in someone's gun shop, hoping to scare away customers until they go broke. So it did fix it one way or another. I don't know the specific answer to your question. Something else it did was enacted this idea of safe passage, where if you had a gun that was legal in your state and it was also legal in your destination state, but you were driving through a state where it was illegal, as long as you had it locked up in your car and unloaded in a certain way, then you could pass through that state legally. Generally, states have ignored this and still prosecuted people when they find them violating the local state law. And the courts have failed to uphold the safe passage provisions of the FOPA. So it's a nice idea, but it doesn't work in real life. And the last big part of the 86 FOPA, which is why most people consider it such a mixed bag, was this thing called the Hughes Amendment, which is what I mentioned previously, that closed the registry of machine guns. So it was literally one of these like midnight amendments, and you can watch the video on YouTube of them voting on the amendment. And Charlie Rangel was presiding over the House of Representatives at the time, and they were doing voice votes. And so they call for the amendment and they call yays or nays, voice vote, and it sounds like it fails. And Charlie Rangel says it passes. And then they call for a counted vote, and he just ignores it and moves on. But it was part of the final law, and it was signed into law. So procedural problems aside, it did legitimately become a law when Congress passed the entire bill and then the president signed it. But it's what actually put that artificial cap on the number of machine guns that are allowed to be sold amongst private individuals in the U.S.
Yeah, the Senate still could have blocked it, or the president could have vetoed it.
Yes. It is an incredibly crooked thing, though, when you watch the video on YouTube, because you can tell by the voice vote that it didn't pass, and then a bunch of people called for a counted vote, and he just ignores it and moves on. It's okay. He's still committing tax fraud and still in the House of Representatives today. The last big gun law we've had at the federal level was the 1994 assault weapon ban. It's no longer in effect. It was only in effect for 10 years. It had a sunset clause that was part of the negotiation to get it passed. It put a nationwide 10-round limit on new magazines. So if you previously owned a magazine for a gun that was over 10 rounds, you got to keep it. You could still use it, buy it, sell it, transport it, everything. But no new ones could come onto the civilian market during that time. And again, that's sunsetted, so that's no longer the law. And then it also did the same thing with this new classification of weapons called assault weapons. And all of your assault weapons, they're merely cosmetic variants of other weapons. So there's nothing inherently more lethal about something that is called an assault weapon. It's simply that it has various cosmetic or ergonomic features, some of which are arguably safety features that make them easier to use or would help someone of small stature or disability to use the gun. So it banned a lot of those things for 10 years, and then it sunset, the law went away, all that stuff's legal again.
What are some examples of things that would make a gun safer that it banned?
Adjustable butt stocks. So the butt stock that goes against your shoulder on a rifle, if you have one that's adjustable, you can change how long the gun is. So if you're, say, a 5'2" person, you would like a shorter butt stock so that you can control the gun better. That's just one example.
Control the gun better / assault. Right.
Assault more effectively. Yeah, and the term assault weapon itself is just a piece of political theater. It was a made-up term that has an ever-changing definition. It's not an objective thing. And various states pass their own state-level assault weapon bans that are still in place. Places like, I know Hawaii, California, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts. I know there are others, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. New Jersey, probably.
Illinois, maybe?
No, actually, Illinois doesn't have one.
Oh, they like assault weapons.
Oh, yeah, they love them. They get so assaulty. So there are a few other gun laws at the national level. Most of them were minor, things like the one that implemented the background check system, the one that implemented the FFL system.
So I know that you're a big proponent of guns and are in favor of gun ownership rights. What do you think about background checks for guns?
I think if we're going to live in a world where we've decided that certain people are prohibited, then background checks are useful. I take issue with the exact sets of people that we think are prohibited.
Which sets do you take issue with?
Felons. I think
that's going to be a very controversial opinion.
Well, I think it's not, because if you are so dangerous that you can't be trusted with a gun, you shouldn't be free in society. You should be in prison. And if they've decided that you can be out of prison and be free in society, then I don't see why a gun makes you more dangerous.
Well, I'm sure you do see why a gun makes you more dangerous. Now you have a gun. Kind of the entire point of a gun is to make you more dangerous. That's why anyone would own a gun. They would say, I want to be more dangerous when I feel like being dangerous.
But if someone's a felon and they're predisposed to commit crimes, then they don't particularly need a gun.
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, they could just run people over with a car.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
If we think felons are so dangerous, well, you can be free at large in society, do whatever you like, but don't have a gun, then maybe that person should still be in prison.
Yeah. Well, so I would say that I agree with you in limited cases. For instance, if someone committed felonious financial crime, then banning them from owning a gun doesn't really seem... It just seems orthogonal to the issue. I could imagine someone can commit a felony, for instance, shoot a bunch of people, but then go to prison for a very long time, and then get out of prison, and then you would say, like, I prefer they don't own a gun. I don't think that feels very rights infringing. And sort of the solution there, if someone complains, would be like, maybe don't murder a bunch of people with guns if you want to maintain your gun rights. I feel like that's a harder example to argue against.
Yeah, I feel like those people should just still be in prison. If we think we can't trust them with a gun, then we should leave them in prison.
I feel like I could come up with an edge case where you'd have a lot of trouble with it.
Yeah, yeah. So we have those, other couple minor gun laws in the U.S., and we have one real doozy, the Undetectable Firearms Act, which is a great one because it literally exists because in Die Hard 2, a guy says that there's a Glock 7 handgun, and it'll pass through an airport metal detector. And so Congress got really scared, and they passed this law that said that you can't make a gun that has less than 105 grams of metal in it, because apparently that's the threshold at which airport metal detectors will go off.
Will they detect 105 grams of aluminum?
I don't know. But that's what the law says, 105 grams. So there is literally no gun in existence that actually falls under the definition of the Undetectable Firearms Act. But Congress has felt compelled several times in history, like 3 times now, to renew this law. They did it again in 2013. They went ahead and passed a renewal to a law that regulates zero guns, because it's scary.
It would be easy to build such a gun, though. You could just make a zip gun that was out of plastic or ceramic, and it was destroyed in the firing.
But you need a cartridge, and you might need a metal fire pin.
The bullet itself is not 105 grams.
I don't know offhand in grams what they weigh.
Well, grams like a paperclip, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with grams to imagine it.
105 grams to...
Do it to grains.
Why have to do grains? It's 3.7 ounces. It's 1,600 grains.
Okay, so that would be a very heavy bullet. Yes. An insanely heavy bullet.
Grains.
The fact remains that there are no available firearms on the market anywhere that would fall under the Undetectable Firearms Act. Like, people can't figure out how to build one.
I just figured out how to build one just now. You're ignoring me. I'm part of people. I just figured out how to build another one. So probably most listeners aren't familiar with gyrojet pistols, but Gyrojet was this manufacturer who wanted to make a very unusual gun. And the gun doesn't really do much, but the bullets themselves, or the rounds, are little rockets. And so when a firing pin is struck on them, they ignite, and rocket fuel is expelled out of 4 little jets on the back. And it also imparts a spin on the bullet. And so the bullet comes out of the barrel at a very low speed, but gradually accelerates to roughly regular bullet speed. The guns had a whole host of problems. They made a bunch of promises they couldn't keep. Now they're collector's items. The bullets are even more of collector's items. But a gun that fires a little tiny rocket doesn't require a whole lot of barrel durability. And so you could construct the barrel. I mean, you could make it out of balsa wood, and it would still work. It'd probably catch on fire, but it would work. So anything that can fire a gyrojet round and then just isn't made out of metal, trivially, it would fall under the Undetectable Firearms Act. It'd be a stupid gun. But there you go. People have figured out how to make them just now on this podcast.
There was that ceramic gun from that Clint Eastwood movie where he was a Secret Service agent.
Was it from that? I thought it was an Executive Decision with Kurt Russell, where someone had a plastic gun. But then they also just had normal guns.
No, Executive Decision was the movie where the special ops guys with Kurt Russell got onto a hijacked plane.
Yeah, well, I remember that part of it.
In flight. They somehow used an F-117 to get onto a hijacked plane. Steven Seagal dies like 10 minutes into the movie, even though he's listed as like one of the prime actors.
I thought that was pretty cool, though, when I was a kid. I was like, whoa, he actually died. Wow.
They also really killed him during filming. He died in real life.
You've only seen zombie Steven Seagal since then. So this is off topic, but there exists this idea of sort of credible threat. When someone is creating a piece of fiction, if a character is in dire straits, like they're under threat of death, and then they miraculously escape, or in fact the bad event occurs, like they get shot, and then later they're just back, and they're not dead, and then they open their shirt and there's a bulletproof vest or something, the audience loses some trust in the creators. And they start thinking, you're not going to kill any of these characters, and so then all of the threats mean a lot less. And so in that movie, the fact that Steven Seagal clearly died because he was in a plane that broke up high up in the atmosphere, it started saying, oh, any of these main characters could get killed. Or maybe the plane explodes. I don't know. And I felt like it did add something to that movie, which was otherwise pretty terrible. I don't recommend it.
I remember it as being like a solid B movie. It wasn't terrible.
It was so dumb.
I watched it again I watched it again sometime in probably like the last 6 or 7 years.
Put a chemical weapon on an aircraft, and then it didn't make any sense. It was so dumb.
Let's talk about prohibited persons.
Okay.
Okay, so in the US, the federal government says there's all these different classifications of people who are not allowed to buy guns, or have guns, or use guns, or ammunition. And they're all grouped as prohibited persons. So when you go to buy a gun at a gun store and you fill out the paperwork and you do the background check, what they're really checking with the background check is that you are not a prohibited person.
So they're not checking your background for a history of violence.
No, except to the extent that if you have a history of violence, you're probably prohibited. You probably fall into one of the categories of prohibited persons.
I will say that before this, I didn't know what the background check accomplished.
I think most people don't know.
Just never occurred to me. That's also a very simple answer. It's seeing if you're on a list.
Yeah, it is a list of lists.
Mm.
So you have people convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. Now, that's not that they were imprisoned, but that they were convicted of a crime that is punishable by imprisonment of a term exceeding 1 year. And this is one that's really problematic because you get into things like, well, what about financial crime? Well, yeah, if you're convicted of a financial crime and the term of imprisonment could have been more than 1 year, you're now prohibited from owning guns? Because, I mean, if Bernie Madoff got out of prison, should he be prohibited from owning guns? It's probably too broad. People who are fugitives from justice are prohibited. Someone who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance. And so, because this is at the federal level and marijuana, for instance, is still a class 1 substance at the federal level, the ATF says that even if you're legal at the state level with marijuana, you can't have a gun.
Would that include medical marijuana users?
Yeah, because the federal government doesn't even recognize medical marijuana as legitimate. It's still a Schedule 1 drug, which by the federal definition means that it has no medical value.
Well, someone's probably wrong there.
Yeah. One group of people has to be wrong. Okay. People who have been adjudicated as mentally defective or have been committed to any mental institution.
Just ever?
Apparently so, and some of these kind of have outs with them that you can go to court and have your case reviewed and get off the list of prohibited persons for some of these.
You can become legally all better.
Yeah. And here, adjudicated mentally defective has very precise definitions in the law. You have to be adjudicated in a court and shown to be mentally defective. There's been a lot of recent history about what it means to be mentally defective when it comes to owning guns. Up to about January 20th of this year, there were rules in place that would take people who were on Social Security, and if they had assigned somebody to be able to cash their Social Security check, the government said they were mentally defective and unable to own guns.
Wow.
Yeah. So the previous administration took some very broad definitions of what it meant to be mentally defective, and none of them went through courts as is required. And so it was kind of an end run trying to prohibit a whole bunch of people from owning guns. And it's mostly been reversed now and fixed. So we're back under like normal rule of law where you understand what the law is supposed to be. So the next group is illegal aliens, are not allowed to have guns. People who have been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions. Anyone who has renounced his or her United States citizenship. Anyone who's subject to a court order restraining the person from harassing, stalking, or threatening an intimate partner or child of the intimate partner. So basically, if you have restraining orders.
Well, that sounds like it's restricted to a restraining order against, like, your significant other.
Yeah, it's domestic.
So not restraining orders from people who live near each other.
Yeah. If you're not an intimate partner, then you get to keep your gun. And people who have been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. That's another one that's very thorny because state by state, the definition of what a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence is varies a lot. In some states, if you're having an argument with your wife and she just irritates you so badly and you decide you can't handle it anymore, so you want to go outside and sit on the porch and cool off, and you slam the door on your way out. In some states, that's a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, and you could be unable to own guns again. So it's kind of messy that these federal definitions depend on state laws in a lot of cases, because then you get very uneven treatment.
Yeah.
So that's all the list of prohibited persons. Do you have any questions?
Nah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about concealed carry and concealed carry laws.
I have a question for that.
Great.
Why would anyone want a concealed carry? Don't only criminals do that?
Well, there are 16.3 million people in the U.S. who have permits to carry concealed.
Maybe there's 16.3 million criminals in the U.S.
Would they get permits, though?
The most sinister ones.
They would advertise it. And that doesn't take into account that number 16.3 million as of 2017. That does not take into account states where you do not need a permit to carry concealed.
Isn't that Alaska?
No, there are 12 states where you can carry unpermitted.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that list is growing. It's interesting to look at the history of concealed carry legalization. The list of states where you could carry concealed was mostly static until like the late 1980s. And from then on, just state after state has legalized it and made it less and less restrictive until today you kind of can carry in almost every state, but it depends. So 12 states are unpermitted. 32 states have what's called shall issue. What that means is that if you meet the requirements of the law, the state shall issue you a license. They can't arbitrarily deny you. So there are some states where even though you do meet the requirements of the law, they're called may issue, and the state still may issue you a license, may not, depending on, whether they like you, whether they like how you talk, whether they're in a good mood that day. They may or may not, even though you meet all the requirements of the law to get a concealed carry license. The general trend has been more and more and more states going to shall issue. 32 states are now shall issue. There are 3 states that are may issue. It's California, Massachusetts, and New York. So in those states, it generally, if you live in a county where the sheriff is okay with it, he'll grant everyone who asks for a permit and meets the state requirements, he'll grant them a permit. But if you live in a county where the sheriff isn't okay with it, no one gets a permit unless they're well connected or wealthy or politically important, then they get permits. Like where Blake lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's virtually impossible to get a concealed carry permit. But if you're well connected, you can have one. For instance, the senior senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, when she lived in the San Francisco Bay Area in, I believe, the 70s, she had a concealed carry permit and carried a gun.
She's also the most anti-gun politician.
Wow, imagine hypocrisy. So there are 3 states that are may issue by statute. So the law says here are the requirements, but the authorities can still deny you on a whim, but they are effectively no issue by practice, so nobody gets one. Those are Hawaii, Maryland, and New Jersey, and then also the District of Columbia. So they're nominally legal, but you really almost no one gets one. Whereas in California, if you live on the eastern side of California, in the areas that vote more conservatively, the sheriff's pretty likely to give you a license if you ask one.
So why would anyone want a concealed carry?
In case they met a situation that required lethal force.
Doesn't having people concealed carry increase the likelihood of gun violence?
No. For instance, in Texas, where I live, part of the law that created the current concealed carry statutes in the late 1990s, they wanted to know the answer to that exact question. And so the Department of Public Safety in the state of Texas, which is the department that administers concealed carry licenses, they were required by the law to also keep statistics on crime rates for something like 200 different categories of crime among the entire population of the state of Texas, and then also among people who have concealed carry licenses. And they release this data every year. You can go on the DPS website and find it. You can find the PDFs of the presentation of data for every year going back into the 90s. And consistently what it shows is that because people who go and get concealed carry licenses are a self-selecting group of law-abiding people, when you break them out from the average population and you look at their crime rates against the average population, you see that they commit crimes at about 1/10 the rate of the average population.
So there's not blood in the streets?
No, there is in fact not blood in the streets, and every fender bender does not turn into a shootout. I kind of wish at some point somebody would go through like every state's legislative committee hearings when they were trying to pass concealed carry and make a highlight reel of every person saying, if you pass this, there will be blood in the streets. Because I feel like it would be about 3 hours long of just that sentence over and over and over again.
That might be doable.
It would be doable, but the effort would be so much. And then you would get the point after like 2 minutes and you'd be like, yeah, I can imagine what the rest of this 3 hours is.
There are some 10-hour videos on YouTube, and the point isn't to watch them for 10 hours. It's that you could skip through them and be like, yeah, that's 10 hours of that. I think it would make its point.
But yeah, that's one of the arguments that is kind of comically thrown out there by people who don't like the idea of concealed carry. They're like, well, there will be blood in the streets. And it's like, well, again, this is a self-selecting group of law-abiding people.
I don't think it seems comic to them. If you don't understand, like, if you didn't have those statistics, you wouldn't necessarily know. You would think, well, a concealed carry person is much more likely to have a gun on them, and so they're much more likely to be able to shoot someone. And so then you'd say, well, how often do they escalate to shooting? How often? There's a lot of other things, like, do they just de-escalate by leaving? Are they more likely to? The other thing that no one really tracks and no one really knows is how often is a gun brandished and that ends an encounter and then no one creates a legal record of it. Also, no one knows how often that occurs illegally. It probably does. So there are certain things where some people are ignorant of stuff and some people simply can't know. And so it makes sense that someone who doesn't really have much information about it would say, isn't concealed carry bad? It's not a giant jump to imagine why carrying a gun could be a problem.
The statistics, though, resolve the issue.
That's true.
And then generally places, every state will have a list of places that you still can't take a gun, even if you're permitted to carry it. And it's generally schools and courts and jails and hospitals. And some states get real hyper about taking it into like bars, or, they'll still not let you drink when you're carrying, but some of them say you still can't even take it into the bar, even though you're not allowed to drink. And there are other places that various states get excited about, like in Texas, you can't take it into an amusement park.
Huh. I also didn't know hospitals were frequently on that list.
Yeah, that's a really weird one. I don't understand. I mean, if someone's going to get shot, you would probably want it to happen in a hospital.
Yeah.
It seems like the best place to shoot somebody.
I know that has happened. I remember reading about a shooting that occurred in a hospital, and I think 0 people died, even though many of them were critically injured, because they all received immediate expert care. Like, basically multiple people were able to jump on them, triage them, put pressure on wounds, give them a blood transfusion within a minute. They were receiving just the best care. And it really showed how non-lethal bullets are in the first few seconds, and how much of it is untreated bullet wounds over a scale of seconds to minutes are what kills people.
Right. And handguns in general are just not that lethal. The statistic that's bandied around a lot is that only about 20% of handgun wounds are fatal.
That's pretty low.
Yeah.
How does that count multiple wounds?
I don't know.
Does that mean if you shoot each person 5 times and they always die, that you still get that stat?
I wish I had it said
We don't
anything.
know which of the 5 it was, but it couldn't have been all 5 of them. It was only one of them, right?
They have to share the responsibility. Each bullet paints 1/5 of a corpse on the side of itself.
I guess you could make up for it with what happened in Indiana Jones, where he shot 3 or 4 German soldiers with a single bullet. So that was like 400% lethal wounds.
Did it go through, though?
I think so. And it was from his little revolver that he carried.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Right through him.
Okay, so there are a couple more, like, funny laws I wanted to talk about at state levels. Some of the, like, really stupid ones, like 50 caliber ban. So I know that New York and California both have bans, maybe other states do too, on 50 caliber guns in civilian ownership.
But haven't people committed a bunch of crimes with 50 caliber guns?
No, there are, in fact, no known crimes committed with 50 caliber guns.
Because they banned them, right?
No. Because the guns are really big and heavy, and criminals prefer small, concealable guns. Criminals, by and large, prefer handguns because they're very concealable and handy. They don't want to carry around a very large 50 caliber gun. Even a 50 caliber handgun is very big. So it was kind of, you know, these laws to ban 50 caliber weapons from civilian ownership in these couple of states that have done it. It's more about political theater again. It's like, oh, we're doing something to be hard on gun violence. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you're going to prevent the no crimes that have been committed with these guns, I guess.
Keep it at 0.
Still at 0. So Connecticut had a really stupid law, and it still has it. It's legal, again, it's legal at the federal level to own a machine gun. If you go through the NFA process and you pay your tax and everything. If you live in Connecticut and you own a machine gun, it has to be modified so that it can only fire in fully automatic mode. It cannot fire in a semi-automatic mode.
What do you think the intent of that was?
I guess so that you couldn't conceal that you have a machine gun, but if you're trying to conceal that your gun is a machine gun, wouldn't you just violate that law too?
Well, also, you could just have an identical looking gun that was semi-automatic. And then just do the old switcheroo.
I don't understand how this law fixes a scenario like that. Please explain.
What? No. I'm saying here's how someone gets around what that law is intending to expose. So say they have a full auto AR-15, and then they have a semi-auto AR-15. And they go to the range and they fire their semi-auto, and then they go commit a crime with the full auto. Nobody at the range would have known that they had an automatic AR-15.
I don't think the criminal cares at all if his final intent is commit a crime with a machine gun.
Well, you were talking about how to conceal that it's full auto.
I don't know what the original intention of that law is. I know it's really dumb, though. Like, why would you want to restrict the gun to only shoot in fully automatic?
I don't know. I know another easy way to do it is you can load your magazine so that every other round is an empty casing. And so then you'd fire one round, and then you'd have to rack the slide to get the empty casing out. It'd be like a bolt-action rifle.
Okay, so in the 1990s at some point, this ammunition came out, and it had black Teflon on the bullet. And the point of the Teflon was to make it feed better, more reliably into the gun. So, you know, when the bullet is getting pushed out of the magazine and into the chamber in the barrel, it slides up this feed ramp. And by putting Teflon on the bullet, it slides easier and it's less likely to jam up. And so some companies started putting Teflon on their bullets in order to just make them more reliable. So a bunch of people, I don't know who, went around and started saying, oh my God, these Teflon bullets, I don't understand anything about science or ballistics or anything, but Teflon certainly seems like it'll just make a bullet slip right through the body armor that police wear. And so you kind of had this entirely ridiculous fake public outcry that this was armor-piercing ammunition just because it was coated in Teflon, which is obviously not true. It didn't give it any ability to penetrate armor. But nonetheless, the legislature in the state of Oklahoma decided to ban bullets covered in Teflon. And that ban is still in place today. Okay, and the last stupid state level law, this is one that was recently done away with. But in the state of Ohio, up until a couple of years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, you could have a magazine that was over 30 rounds. Like, say you had a 40-round magazine for an AR-15. You could own that magazine, transport it, buy it, sell it. But if you took any magazine that could hold more than 30 rounds and you inserted that magazine into a gun, then legally that gun was now a machine gun. And fell under all of the restrictions of machine guns. And so the effect of that was, unless you had a legally registered machine gun, you could not use a magazine over 30 rounds. You could still own them and do whatever else, but you could not put it in a gun.
What does it mean when the press talks about someone having an unregistered, unlicensed firearm?
In most states, it means nothing, because most states do not have a state-level registration or licensing for firearms. There is no federal licensing, and there is no federal registration for regular guns. Now, those NFA items, those are federally registered. Most of the time, that's just ignorance on the part of the journalist. It typically doesn't mean anything. Now, like in California, there's a state registry. So the California state government knows all the guns owned by law-abiding citizens who chose to register them with the state.
Is it legal to file the serial number off of your own gun?
It is not.
Oh, that's interesting. Anywhere?
Yeah. Anywhere. It's federally prohibited. Now, if you build your own gun, you do not have to have a serial number on it.
Is it legal to build your own gun?
It is. In most states, it's legal to build your own gun. And the federal government really doesn't care. They just say, well, go have fun with that. Because, I mean, it's not a threat. It's like, what is some gang in Oakland going to buy a bunch of CNC machines and start manufacturing guns?
I don't know. Maybe we have some pretty high-tech gangs out here. Maybe they're 3D printing them. Maybe they're into cybercrime.
It's much easier and cheaper to just buy stolen guns off the black market.
What about buying guns by mail?
When you hear people talk about mail order guns or buying guns on the internet, what that really means is that you go onto, say, a website of an online gun dealer and you pay him money, but he cannot legally ship that gun to you. He has to ship it to a federally firearms licensed dealer in your state. And that person will receive the gun, and then when he transfers it to you, he performs the background check. And you fill out the paperwork. And so then there's a paper trail from the online dealer to the FFL dealer that you had him ship it to, and then on to you as the buyer. So, just saying like, oh, you can buy guns on the internet. Well, it doesn't mean that, the paper trail ends and nobody knows who bought them. It just means that you purchased it over the internet and it was sent typically to a local gun store where all the rest of the regulations could be followed.
What if you buy a bunch of parts and then make your own gun?
That's fine. Nobody cares. Like, the federal government doesn't care. I mean, a lot of people do that because they enjoy building guns. So they buy frames that are nearly complete, but don't count as guns yet. And then they do the final operations to complete the frame, and then they attach all the rest of the parts to it and have a complete gun.
Why do you think people feel like gun violence is such a problematic issue in the US?
Because I think most people think it's a bigger occurrence than it actually is. And so one thing that happens is you'll hear these numbers like 30,000 people a year are killed by guns, And the first thing to understand about that is over 20,000 of those 30,000 are suicides. So when the number is thrown out as they're killed by guns and the intent is to scare people about guns, then they often don't want to immediately say, by the way, 2/3 were suicide. So you get down to fewer than 10,000 that are not suicide. And from that, you have to subtract lawful homicide, which is things like police killing criminals and concealed carry license holder killing criminals and, like homeowners whose homes get invaded and they kill the person who's there. So you subtract those because, like, we want those. And then from that, you have to subtract the biggest proportion of real murders in the US, which is drug and gang-related murders.
Why do you have to subtract that?
If you subtract that, and we really don't care. I mean, I don't get upset when some gang member kills another gang member over drug turf. So I don't care. When you subtract that, you end up with somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 murders a year in the US, where it is strictly a bad guy decides to kill an innocent good person.
Mm.
And those are the bad ones. But you're at about 1/10 the rate that is advertised to the average person who doesn't understand the issue. To them, it's advertised as 30,000 a year, when in reality, the ones that he's actually should be worried about, it's 2,000 to 3,000 a year.
Why do you think politicians care so much about passing legislation either restricting or allowing guns?
Because I think in any particular state, a certain outcome will be popular, and that same outcome will be easily achievable. So if California politicians decide they want to restrict gun rights more, it's easy for them to do in the legislature. I think they have a supermajority in their legislature in California. And so it makes them look good. The citizens on a whole of California want it, and it's easy to do.
How about at the federal level?
I think there it's more about grandstanding because it's very hard to actually get something passed.
Mm.
It's an easy wedge topic in American politics. It's like abortion. There are very few politicians who are seriously upset about abortion either way. Like, really think, oh man, it needs to be less restrictive or more restrictive. But it's a really good wedge topic that the average person has a very strong opinion on.
Mm.
And so you can get people riled up really good without having to actually accomplish anything and trade a lot of political capital to get something important done.
What do you think about Japan having all guns be banned?
There's an interesting thing that happens when people start talking about comparisons with gun laws in other countries. You can find countries that will fit whatever conclusion you like. So you'll have Japan, where guns are almost entirely banned and crime is very low. You have countries like Switzerland, where fully automatic machine guns are very common among civilian ownership and crime is very low. You have countries like Mexico, where guns are heavily restricted, but crime is sky high. You can find whatever you want, but what generally comes out is that the crime is more relative to just racial homogeneity within a country. And so Japan has incredibly high racial homogeneity, and so they have very low crime. Whereas countries like the US, we have very large minority populations, and we have very large crime too. Well, we don't have very large crime, but we have high crime. I guess we're above average.
I feel like that sort of implies that most gun violence is occurring at the borders of different races. Is that true?
No, and I think there is another intermediate effect in there before that happens. Because if you look at like FBI statistics, if you look at FBI breaks down murders by race of the perpetrator and race of the victim, and like black on black crime is enormous. And so there are tons of black people killing other black people.
But I would also guess all the statistics are dominated by same race on same race. Because people of the same race are just more likely to know each other.
And interact.
Yeah, and people mostly don't kill people they don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we know those two facts, but we're having trouble figuring out why they both exist. So we know that racial homogeneity is a large determiner of crime rate in a country. But then we also know that most crime is within one race. Like it's the perpetrator and the victim will be of the same race.
Well, we don't know that. I haven't checked.
Well, I mean, the FBI numbers show that.
Oh, okay.
At least for black on black crime, which is the majority in the US.
Also in Mexico, is it racially diverse? or homogenous?
I think it's fairly diverse because you have a lot of people of native ancestry and then a lot of people of European ancestry. I think there's a better spectrum where in the US we have like white people and black people and Hispanics and Asians, right? You know, we have these like 4 groups that are all fairly different.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mexico, you have this continuum from European to Native American, and then everybody is along that continuum.
And then I guess if you just move a few hundred miles in Mexico, then you're in a different racial area than where you grew up.
All the genes are different.
Yeah.
Also, Mexico has high crime problems too because it's just a shithole with bad governance. That can be our lead in. Mexico has high crime because it's a shithole with bad governance.
Probably not. I'm trying to think of anything where it's racially homogenous but has high crime.
Good luck.
Central American countries? South American?
Those are confounded by...
What's the crimiest place in Europe? Or how about Africa?
No, okay, so the murder capital of the world at the national level is Honduras. And Honduras is a very even split of descendants of Black Africans and Native Americans. And it has the highest murder rate in the world.
Didn't we go to Honduras?
Yeah. The cruise ship stopped there. That's where we would...
It was rough.
That's where we did Snuba.
Okay.
Remember we saw the guy at the gas station with a shotgun just patrolling?
There was another guy with what looked like a just AR-15.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you need that? And that was, I think, an island off the coast of Honduras. It wasn't even Honduras. Or maybe it was a peninsula.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly. It was Roatan.
Oh, yeah, that's it. It did not look like a safe place to live.
There was some pretty incredible poverty there. Like just driving through in our air-conditioned bus to our cruise ship excursion.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story from that?
Which story?
So, we were riding in the bus, and the driver was very talented. He was avoiding, essentially the road was like playing Minesweeper. It was like half potholes and half not potholes. And the guy did this amazing twisty route that was taking the bus exactly not over any of the potholes. We were all very impressed with that. And so the driver was clearly an expert. And he was like, I got this. And one of the women on the bus said something like, "Oh, I think you might want to fasten your seatbelt." And he just pretended to not understand her, or maybe he didn't understand her. And then someone was, I think maybe I said, why did you tell him that? And she said, "Well, I didn't want him to get a ticket." And it was just like, look around, lady. He's more likely to get shot than to get a ticket. There's no one handing out seatbelt tickets here.
If anything, they'll just pull you over and expect everyone on the bus to pay $20 and then we can keep going.
Yeah, that would have been a lot more likely. I thought about that later, and I was like, what if our bus had broken down?
I bet they would have had another bus dispatched out there pretty quick. Thanks for listening to our Fungineering podcast. Do you know someone smart? Is he bored? Send him a link to our podcast. Would he be offended that we assumed his gender? Don't send him a link to our podcast. And please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you have an idea for a discussion you'd like to hear, send some money to our Bitcoin wallet and encode your suggestion as a note in the blockchain.